Venvi Art Gallery is pleased to present Enchantment, a solo exhibition by Julie Bowland. This show features Bowland's signature plein air landscapes capturing the magical serenity of North Florida's outdoors and beyond. The collection of oilworks in Enchantment were painted directly from nature, a technique known as in plein air, French for in open air. In this manner, Boland describes how the changing conditions of the outdoors inspire her to work with spontaneity and dynamic brushstrokes, capturing each scene as she sees it in the moment. She states, "It is exciting and inspiring to slather the paint, engulfed in a wild swamp or forest, to dance within the elements of wind, wildlife, and shifting light."
Was inspired by a quote by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, who wrote The Yearling and Cross Creek, which of course really explored the natural world of North Florida back in the early 20th century, mid 20th century. And a friend actually suggested it. And what she said was, "I do not understand how anyone can live without some small place of enchantment to turn to." And it really struck me because there's so much beauty around us, and so much magic, really. And so when I go out and paint, I really look for that. I look for that beauty, I look for that magic. And I just thought it was really appropriate, because I think a lot of people kind of think landscape is something that's very sort of very ordinary, very kind of boring. Like I had to sort of struggle with that when I was in art school. It was kind of like, landscape, like why are you doing that? But to me, it's really very beautiful and very meaningful and very magic. And so that's what I try to portray.
I feel like that definitely delivers through your work. So it's really cool to hear you say that. How long have you been a plein air painter, or just a painter in general?
Well, I think I've always been an artist, ever since I was a little kid. And the first time I really remember doing a plein air painting was probably in junior high school. That's what we used to call middle school, those of you younger people who might not know that term. And anyway, I remember we went outside and did watercolors, and there was like a cherry blossom tree or something really beautiful that was blooming. And I remember just looking at it and trying to paint the sky between the branches and the little, just kind of like tripping out on how beautiful it was. And I've came back to that as a college student. It was an assignment, go out to the lake and paint the lake. And I loved it. I was like, this is it, this is what I'm going to do. And so how many years has that been? It's been a lot of years. Let's just say it's been, I'm not one of these Johnny come lately plein air painters. I've been doing it at least 40 years.
Okay, very cool.
I guess that would be a simple way that I could have answered your question, was 40 years.
No, I enjoyed the background. I know that you worked with Mark Messersmith. Do you think he had a big role in your work and landscape work?
Yeah, I mean, Mark had and still has a huge role in my development as an artist. And he's still a great friend, and I still am in awe when I come to Venvi and see his paintings. To me, he's the most amazing painter around anywhere. And he continues to be a really supportive friend. But, in terms of learning to paint, I came to Tallahassee and FSU after attending community college in Jacksonville. So, I had a couple years of basic art and painting under my belt. But Mark really changed the way that I see and use color. And one of the big things is we didn't use brown in his class, right?
Right.
Are you also a former student of his?
Not of his, but of Lillian and Judy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was kind of the big change from, I guess, how I'd been taught to paint and working with him. And it wasn't that you couldn't use brown, but you learn to mix your own brown. But also working with landscape, it just seems like brown and green. So many people just like, okay, it's a landscape, it's a tree, it needs to be brown and green. And to me, those are very boring colors in paintings. In real life, they're not boring. Nature and all the incredible shades of green and brown are amazing, but somehow paint doesn't really translate to be that interesting in brown and green to me. So to find other ways of portraying brown and green or local colors in general is one thing that Mark really inspired in me. But yeah, he remains a huge influence.
How does your background influence your work? So I know you had mentioned the story about you first learning to paint or plein air painting in middle school. But do you think you have any other influence or any other things that have impacted your experience as an artist?
Well, life in general. I guess my two main influences are, other people's art, growing up with knowledge of impressionists and post-impressionists. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and also Southern Michigan, and my parents would take us to the Chicago Art Institute, and even as a very small child, seeing those incredible paintings by Monet and Van Gogh and Gauguin and many others in person, that made a huge impact on me. I felt like I want to do that. I didn't really have a knowledge that I could do that, but it was just like seeing those paintings and the layers of paint and the physicality of the paint and the color. It was like I just craved that somehow. So art, actual, real, beautiful art was a huge influence. And then just loving nature and growing up in the country, Southern Michigan, surrounded by trees and rivers and things like that, was always a main influence. So for me, it's always a matter of kind of bouncing back and forth between nature, actual nature, and and art, specifically painting. I love sculpture actually, but maybe that sleeps into my work a little bit because of the texture and the impasto quality. So maybe even sculpture does seep in there a little bit.
Right. That's so interesting that you've lived in so many different places that are so different in their environment. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
I live in extreme North Florida, which is actually South Georgia. I actually live in Georgia, but I come back to Florida a lot because I love Florida in spite of what's happening to it right now. But I love the nature of Florida. I love, the coast, sure, but the marshes, the estuaries, the rivers, the springs, the forests. There's so much beauty that I'm continually pulled back to it. So I like to paint water. So there's a lot of water in North Florida.
Yeah, that's true. I always tell people living in Florida it always feels so special. And how does being a professor influence you as an artist?
Well, it did influence me. Again, I retired about a year ago, so I don't really think of myself as a professor anymore. I'm an artist now. Anyway, of course, I always was an artist, but how it did affect me was it made me try new things and challenge myself. And I figured, if I could say something to a student, I should be able to say it to myself too, right? If I say to a student, well, why don't you try like several designs for that? Or, yeah, are you sure that's done? Then, I have to ask myself that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's a fair question.
living in North Florida impacts your work specifically?
Well, I live in extreme North Florida, which is actually South Georgia. I actually live in Georgia, but I come back to Florida a lot because I love Florida in spite of what's happening to it right now. But I love the nature of Florida. I love, the coast, sure, but the marshes, the estuaries, the rivers, the springs, the forests. There's so much beauty that I'm continually pulled back to it. So I like to paint water. So there's a lot of water in North Florida.
Yeah. How does can you talk a little bit more about your process and how do you typically set up for a painting site?
Well, I guess the first thing is to find a place that I want to paint, right? I mean, some people, I'll name a name, Mark Messersmith, when he does plein air, he could pull up anywhere. He can paint a telephone pole and it's amazing. But I'm not so much like that. I kind of need to get kind of inspired, kind of excited by a place.
Mhm.
So, sometimes it means I'm driving around a while or walking around a while. And sometimes that's the most time consuming part. But when I do find a place that really, calls to me to paint, painting, if it's something that's unfamiliar to me, like if I'm in the mountains or in some odd landscape, I'll definitely sketch it out and try to figure it out first. I like to draw for its own sake. I also like to do pastels and mixed media and watercolor, which sometimes I do from a kayak. People know that I sometimes paint from a kayak, but I don't paint oil. I don't paint a 6-foot oil painting from a kayak, but I'll paint a watercolor. I'll do a pastel, mixed media. And that, again, even those contribute to the oil paintings because I might learn something new about color, about mark making, or about expressing how a particular tree grows. So I feel like everything contributes to the process, including just being in nature. Camp, it puts me in a place where I get to explore an area for 4 days, 5 days, however long, and I can get to know it better. That doesn't mean I run out and paint the first day. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I have to just look and kayak and hike and eat some oysters, and then it all kind of starts to make sense. So process is a very all-encompassing thing, but as far as the technical process, again, that's kind of what I described earlier.
Yeah. Thank you so much.